People who are not from Darlington, welcome to the town. It's a great town, it's got a great hospital, it's got some great people and some great NHS conditions, and let's keep it that way. Like a lot of you in the audience, I was born in the NHS. I seriously want to die in the NHS. More passionately, I want my daughter and her children to have the NHS. If we don't do something to protect the NHS, it will not be there. Make no mistake about it. None of what's happening is an accident. I'm sure we'll hear in more detail in a minute exactly what is happening. But none of it is an accident. It's a cold, calculated, strategic decision that they have made, not just to attack the NHS, but everything else that we believe in. Local government is taking a hammering. I tweeted the other day, and it struck me, despite the fact I wrote it, it struck me as something really poignant. First you stuff local government, and then they stuff their pockets. And that's exactly the tactic that they're planning with the NHS. They're not interested in healthcare for people, they're interested in profits for them and their friends. Just before I hand over to Joanne, just a word. About 2-3 months ago, Joanne came to a party meeting for the first time. She wasn't politically active, she'd been involved in work, struggling with the withdrawal of tax credits and all of the other cuts the Tories had made. Despite that, Joanne wanted to do something for the NHS. She was clearly passionate. Myself and the other speakers that you'll hear are semi-professional in the business. Jo is one of the most committed people I have met in a long time. And if we've got people like Jo from a standing start who can get involved and sort something like this out, the NHS will be safe, but only safe if we make it safe and if we support people like Joanne. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here today. There are so many people that have helped to make today possible. I doubt I could begin to thank you all. But thank you to all the people who have handed out flyers, written emails, made calls, put up stages, tweeted, Facebooked and spread the word about today and about what's happening to our NHS. Finding people to help was not hard at all. I no sooner mentioned organising a rally than people were offering me time, equipment, money, advice. People I didn't know, people who live as far away as Scotland, they aren't even affected by what's happening in England. Well, why was that? Why would strangers help me like that? Well, I have a theory. I believe it's because people are fundamentally decent. They care about things and each other. I know, that's quite a radical suggestion these days, isn't it? That human beings are civilised and caring and compassionate. It's a concept that's been mocked and diminished over the last 10 to 20 years. We see so much hate and violence and crime and selfishness on our TVs and in the newspapers. It's quite easy to become bitter about the world and mistrust your neighbours and point the finger at people. You can isolate yourselves from each other and focus on taking care of your own. In fact, I would say we're being encouraged to do exactly that, only ever asking, how will this affect me? Oh well, those people lost out there, but they probably deserved it. They must be scroungers, they must be illegal immigrants, single mothers, they're probably benefits cheats. I hear people saying things like, oh well, yes, they wouldn't have taken that benefit off them if it wasn't right. Or why should I pay my taxes for you to sit at home all day? But hardly ever do people take the time to find out a full story, to ask why a family with 3 children, a nice house, a widescreen TV ends up needing benefits. The truth is, benefits fraud is a tiny expense. Almost half in fact of our benefits bill goes on pensions. A small part goes on out-of-work benefits, and the rest is spent on propping up working families struggling to keep their heads above water, to pay rising fuel bills, extortionate childcare costs, to buy food or to feed their families. Families whose pay has been frozen for the last 5 years and they're starting to feel the pinch. They're on zero-hour contracts and can't rely on a regular wage. They have high rent costs. These people aren't the cause of our problems. They're the victims of this problem. But these things are bypassed, forgotten, certainly by the media, almost inevitably by most politicians, and often even by us. Why? Why are we talking about making 25-year-olds move back in with their parents and not talking about people being exploited on low wages or workfare schemes or humiliated by ATOS? Why is that? Why indeed? Well, we need to stop. We need to refocus on the real public enemies, on the secret billionaires and the tax-evading greedy executives, the fraudsters who've gambled our nature's futures, betting our hospitals on stocks and shares, or schools on commodities and bonds. We need to stand together and say no more of this. The NHS is more than just a means of looking after our health. It's more than just a sum of its parts. It's more than an expensive foible we can't afford in austere times. It's a shining beacon of humanity. It's a symbol of what happens when people come together and work to make things happen. It's a symbol of social cohesion and social responsibility. It represents working for the good of many, not just profits for a few elite rich people. The NHS is part of us. It's made by us, it's used by us, it's owned by us, and it's loved by us. I've been asked a lot of times why I organise this event. Well, I'm a mother. My children are over there, actually. You can spot them, they're the gorgeous ones. And I fear for them. I fear for their future. I fear for the future that we all face. I'm betting in this crowd there are a lot of mothers and fathers worrying about their kids. What can they hope for them for a job? What can they hope for an education? University? Ha! It's enough. I can't accept that we have to worry about whether or not we can afford our children developing diabetes or cancer or needing an A&E. I can't accept that some hospitals won't offer urgent care or drugs because they're simply not able to make enough profit out of it. I can't accept that people are having to wait for hospital beds because they're being used up by people simply because they can afford to pay for them, not because they need them the most. I can't accept it. I won't, and neither should you.
Well, I first of all want to start with a congratulations to Joanna, our organiser who brought us all here today. I think she deserves another cheer. What she's shown is what one person can do when they say enough. And my second congratulation is to all of you. It's a glorious sunny day here in Darlington. I'm sure the parks are lovely, but you've chosen to be here instead, so I think you should give yourselves a cheer as well. But I'm going to start with a little personal story. Earlier this year, I came down with labyrinthitis, which is an infection of the inner ear. It's not very serious, but it is rather dramatic. I put my head down on the desk in the Green Party office and realised I just couldn't lift it up again. And they called an ambulance, and I was rather dramatically carted out on a stretcher, down the lift, out past a whole lot of people gawking in the lobby, and into the ambulance. And as I was lying there in the ambulance and the world was spinning wildly around me, I wasn't thinking very much about politics, but I had one political thought. And my political thought was, thank God for Nye Bevan and the NHS. Because had I been in America, I would have been lying in that ambulance thinking, my God, what's the bill going to be? I'd be thinking, as they went through all sorts of complicated, expensive tests to make sure I hadn't had a stroke and that I didn't have a brain tumour, I would have been thinking, what are these all costing? But because of the NHS, I didn't have to think of any of those things. And we have to keep that. But later on, when the world stopped spinning and the labyrinthitis got better, I was thinking a lot more about the politics and thinking about the 2012 healthcare bill. Even before it came into effect, I could see, advised by many of the medical experts, that this was going to be an absolute disaster. And the Green Party, from the start, has been campaigning against that bill, and Caroline Lucas, our Green MP, voted against that bill. But what we've got to do now is go further and get rid of that bill. And in doing that, one of the things we've got to point out is the democratic deficit. There was not in any party manifesto in the 2010 general election provision for a whole reorganisation of the NHS. And there's something else you might know. There are 70 MPs and 142 peers who own or have owned private health company shares. And that, I think, is a huge shame that those people didn't step away and not vote on the bill. And of course we know there's a further problem too. The fact that many of our public administrators, the NHS top people, there's a revolving door. They go off to the private companies, come back to the NHS, go off to the private companies. And we need to stop that revolving door. Now, what we've seen since the bill came into effect is that the already extensive privatisation of the health services that began in the Thatcher era and was embraced wholesale, sadly, by the last Labor government, has accelerated even further. Now, the privatisation under Labor saw more than 100 PFI schemes, projects valued at £11 billion. So those who tell you no privatisation in the NHS, £11 billion with PFI. Remember that figure. And what they've done is offered all of those companies guaranteed index-linked profits. And that is sending NHS Trust broke. We are losing hospitals as a result of those PFI contracts. And they tell you no privatisation? Well, the NHS last year spent £8.7 billion on private services. £8.7 billion. And only this morning we heard from The Guardian they're going to let in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough a contract worth up to £1.1 billion for care of older people. Now that includes what they call end-of-life care. And I don't believe, particularly, that private companies should be making profits out of end-of-life care. There's something particularly obscene about that.